Hi, I'm Greg Nesteroff with a special pre-election interview. I'm here with Kootenay West New Democrat MLA Katrine Conroy in the Rogers TV studio in Castlegar. In 2005, she became the first woman elected MLA in the West Kootenay. She's been in the BC legislature for 19 years, the last 7 as a cabinet minister, and she's agreed to talk to us about her career in provincial politics. Katrine, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here, Greg.
Now, before we discuss your background in politics, I thought maybe we'd start by discussing the election that is on the horizon. It's a much different field than it was at this time a year ago. It's a much different field than it was even a month ago. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the rise of the BC Conservatives in BC?
Well, the whole change in the outlook of the election has been it's a bit strange in the rise of the Conservatives, but also in the I guess the fall of the BC United. We were well, I was personally quite surprised that a leader could take his party out without any discussion with his members or and especially sitting members, longtime sitting members. So that was a bit of a shock to many of us that would happen, and a shock to them. I've talked to a number of them, and they were feeling pretty surprised by it all. Some have decided to run as independents. In fact, one of them, she had announced her retirement, and now she's come back to run as an independent because she was so upset about what happened. And so there's a number who've decided to run as an independent, but it's tough to run as an independent. They've raised money for their campaigns, and they don't get any of that back. So that's difficult for them, and now they're independents up against Conservatives. The Conservative Party rise is interesting. It's what we're finding though is a lot of people don't know who the leader of the BC Conservative Party is. They don't really know who John Rustad is, and a lot of them think the BC Conservatives are Pierre Poilievre because they see all of his ads, and so they're saying, no, that's what we want, and we're saying, well, that's not the BC Conservatives. They're different. They say that too. So it's going to be interesting. I still am very confident in what the NDP is going to do. We just came back from UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities Conference, and got a lot of really positive feedback about the things that we are doing as a government, and people wanting to see it continue. So, it's going to be an interesting election, Greg. There will now, in some of the seats, there will probably only be a couple of candidates. The Greens are not going to have a full campaign across the province. I think we still don't have a Green here yet, I'm pretty sure. Not the last time I checked. It's just a Conservative candidate and our candidate, Steve Morissette. But it's going to be interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about you now. Before getting into politics, you worked in a few different careers, some very diverse and interesting things. Can you give us a brief outline of your resume before politics?
Well, my first job my very first job was working at the complex, running the kids program when I was in high school, and then I got a summer student job at the pulp mill, and I was the first female to actually work in the pulp mill. My dad told me I couldn't get the job. They didn't hire girls; they only hired boys. And you had to have a parent that worked there, and so I said, well, that's not right, and I went and applied, and I think they thought if they put me in the steam plant, which was the worst place, it was a tough place to work, that I wouldn't last, but I did last, and carried on working there off and on for like 4 years, and got my fourth class steam engineer ticket, my power engineer. So it was exciting. It was quite a interesting thing to do, but at the same time, I had at the time started living with my future husband, and he worked on the tugboats, I worked in the pulp mill, and we never saw each other much. And so my dream had always been to actually be a kindergarten teacher, and there was a new program opening at Selkirk as an early childhood education teacher, and so I went and did that, and started working in that field here in Castlegar, and worked at Kootenay Family Place, which was Kootenay Columbia Child Care Society, now Kootenay Family Place, and ran the program for children, family, and youth over the years. Went from an early childhood educator working with the kids up to the position of executive director, and I did that job until I was elected in 2005.
You mentioned your husband Ed. He served as MLA for Rosslyn Trail for 2 terms, 1991 to 2001.
That's right.
What prompted him to seek political office?
Well, in 1990, people started talking about that it was a time for a change in the area, and they actually came and talked to both of us, the executive of the party, and said, would one of you consider running? And at the time, our two younger kids were still young, and it wasn't a very family-friendly job in those days. And I said, Dad, his work was away on the boats. He'd be gone for 2 weeks at a time. I said, what would we do with the kids if I went to Victoria and you're on the boats? I said, not going to work. So he got tapped, and so he decided to run. And he had been political, like we both had. I was raised in a very political family, and he ran a school board before that, so he was on the school board since '96. So it was a good transition for him, and yeah, he enjoyed the job.
What was it like being the spouse of an MLA?
That was interesting, especially because Ed had some health issues during those times, and there'd be times when I would step in and help out for him. So I got a little bit of a taste of what it was like to be an MLA, and I had a few times traveled with him to Victoria just to make sure, help him do his work, and I could do my work from there. So it was interesting, and it was tough in the sense so that it wasn't family friendly. Technology was just coming in. Things like cell phones were just coming in, and laptops, that kind of, so he was always, I don't know if people know that about Ed, but he was always a Luddite. He didn't like that kind of technology, but even things like when I remember once our youngest son got a Super Kid award, and we had to fax it to him so he could see it. But he would go, the house would start sitting in February, and he rarely got back home until August, like beginning of August, just because he'd get home for some weekends, but they sat from Monday morning till Friday afternoon, and it just, sometimes he couldn't get in, the travel was tough, and he wouldn't make it home for 2-3 weeks at a time. So it was a lot tougher for families. As it's far better for families now. It's still not easy, but it's a lot better. And so felt like I had an understanding of what single women go through with kids for many years there.
Just wanted to pick up on one thing you mentioned. You said you grew up in a political family. So how so, and what was the political outlook of your parents? Did it match yours, or was it at odds with yours?
Oh, no, it definitely matched mine. My parents were immigrants from Denmark, the Ben and Ingeborg Larsen, and we used to say we grew up with socialism in the baby bottle, just because we didn't have TV, and dinner was pretty much mandatory at our house, but we loved it. We all sat around and talked from when we were little kids right through to teenagers. We talked about all kinds of different things, and politics was definitely something we talked about. I first campaigned for the NDP when I was 12 years old. Went out campaigning with my dad, knocking on doors, and I remember this woman slammed the door and said, "Get out of here," and I was just stunned, and I went to Dad, she just slammed the door in my face, and he said, "That's going to happen, honey, just keep going." And okay, so I was campaigning for the NDP at 12 and a member, and we just had a lot of discussions about it in our family, and it was just part of life.
And you worked on your husband's campaigns as well?
Worked on all my husband's campaigns too, yeah.
And then, of course, he ran in 2001, wasn't reelected.
No.
What point did you think that you might want to run?
Well, it was tough in 2001. We were left with just 2 MLAs in the legislature. The Liberals came in and they started making massive cuts, and especially to the sector I worked in. They made cuts to the services to childcare, to kids with special needs, to just the services we provided, like speech pathology, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, all those services that kids really need. And it was really tough, and I was frustrated. I'd go home and rant to Ed about how tough it was, how frustrated I was, and one day I remember him saying to me, "Okay, that's enough." And I thought, no, I can rant if I want. And he says, "No, you got to put your money where your mouth is. Like, there's an election coming up. I think it's time that if you want to do something about this, you better do something about it." So I did, and started talking about running in 2004, started talking to the party, and people were happy with it. We were supposed to have there was going to be a nomination meeting in the beginning of 2005, and I was running against 2 fellows, and one of them ended up not running because him and his wife ended up adopting 2 children, and a set of twins, and he was the stay-at-home dad, so he ended up dropping out, and the other person decided not to run. So I actually got in by acclamation, which is unusual, but it was good. We got to go right to work on the campaign in '05.
And you had, I don't know if you want to call it an advantage, but you had the experience of having worked on campaigns and having been married to an MLA and known something about what the job was before you ever got there.
It was great. It was great, Greg. You're right. I mean, to have that experience, to have that support, it was incredible. And I know that when I became an MLA, I had a number of my new colleagues who were MLAs. I had their spouses. We'd go to events in Victoria together, and they would go and talk to Ed to get advice, because he was a spouse now, but he had been an MLA. So yeah, and quite often people would phone, but no, it was a real advantage. It was great. Yeah.
Upon being elected, you were named the caucus whip.
Yes.
What is that job?
So usually it's a position that's elected, but Carol asked me, as our leader, asked me to be the whip. The whip is the person who makes sure everybody does what they're told. They're at they're at the house when they need to be. They're doing the work they need to be. It is making sure that we have enough people in the house for votes. That you know what everybody's doing, and you make sure that you're there to make that everything happens in the house. So and outside of the house as well. It's a position from the British parliamentary system. It's a takeoff on the whips when they were chasing the foxes. That's how far back it goes. But so it was interesting. You're part of the executive, of the caucus executive, and I got to know all my colleagues very well.
Were there any close calls where you couldn't find somebody, or
There was a few close calls, and there was So we had but we always managed to get all our people in for votes, and you have disagreements with people over things. It's tough when you have to say no to people, but it was fine.
Let's fast forward to 2013. Most pollsters and pundits said that the NDP was on track to easily win that election. Didn't happen.
No.
What do you think went wrong for the NDP, or right for the Liberals, for that matter?
Well, a lot of elections are the 28 days, and Christy Clark was the leader of the BC Liberals at the time, and proved to be a formidable campaigner, and really went out and campaigned full on, and it just didn't work for us. It wasn't meant to be. It was incredibly disappointing, because we had all thought, okay, this is it, but you never know. I mean, you look at polls, but at the same time, the best poll to rely on is the poll on election day. So
we hear that. I mean, that is sort of a cliche, but at the same time, that's a cautionary tale that sometimes it's true.
Yeah, it is true. Yeah.
You were ultimately in opposition for 12 years. That's a long time to be on that side of the House.
Yes.
And then in 2017, the race was so close that for a little while, we didn't even know who was going to form government. That was a very interesting time, with the Greens holding the balance of power and talking to both of the other parties. What do you remember about that?
Well, it was the longest. It's the period after an election is called the interregnum. From the time that the election till the time that you actually have a new cabinet and the government gets sworn in. It was very long and stressful for everybody, because we're like, what's going to happen? We were pretty sure that the Greens were more aligned with us than they were with the BC Liberals, but at the same time, we didn't know. So, but when we started to know, it was a few, like some of us knew before. We certainly knew before the public knew, but we had to keep it quiet. But when we knew, it was like, oh my goodness, this is exciting. We can make this work. And I remember the day that John, who's the premier, went to first the House had to fall. I can't forget that important part, because the government came back with such a slim majority, like they had one majority. They came back and put in a budget, and it was very much, this is the BC Liberals, was very much a budget of we called it the NDP budget, because it was so much like everything we had done and what we had said we were going to do in the election. And we had enough people to bring down the House. That's a discussion that's happening in Ottawa right now. So we had enough people to vote to bring down the government. That was quite an exciting day in the legislature. It was one of the few times it's happened. But because we voted against the budget and had enough votes, we brought down the government. A funny story, one of our colleagues went to the washroom just before the vote, and we were, like, it's a countdown to where they lock the doors, and he had to be in there, and we were all going, where did he go? And someone said, I think he's in the washroom, and the old whip in me got me going, and I went running out to get him. Just as I ran out, he was coming in, grabbed him, hauled him back in. Everybody's going, where are you going? You know, it was very, very, really tense time. Funny time, and the people in the gallery, where there's a lot of people watching. A lot of people came to see it because it was a pretty historical day. But we did it, and that was in July.
And then you became the Minister of Children and Family Development in the new cabinet, which is something that was near and dear to your heart.
Very much so, yeah.
And what was it like to finally be in government and to be in cabinet?
It was pretty incredible. What people always say is that the worst day in government is better than the best day in opposition. So, yeah, you can actually affect change. You can do things. It was exciting. It was a bit daunting, but at the same time, we knew that there was a lot we had to do. You know, especially in children and families, you know, we'd really inherited a deficit of services. It was the number of Indigenous kids in care was outrageous. The number of kids in care was just ridiculous. And we started looking at all the things that needed to be done in that ministry alone. It was tough, and you had to. There's only so much money, and it was really hard. But we managed to do some things that I look back at really fondly in that ministry. We bringing in free tuition for kids in care. Kids in care are the government is the parents of kids in care, and most parents try to put a little bit of money away for their kids when they, so they can go to post-secondary. And we're as government, we're the parents of kids in care. So we brought in a tuition waiver, and it's been incredible. The number of young people that have come up to me still. A young fellow came up to me a couple months ago, and they're going to. I'm going to get choked up, Greg. I warned you I would. They're going to school, and there's a young woman I know. She's a pilot. She never thought she'd have that opportunity. Well, this young fellow, he was going to be a carpenter, and he started doing it, and he said, "I don't like this," and he went back to be a social worker. Things like that, which is they would have had that opportunity. So that's a huge one. Giving foster parents the first raise to how much they make in 10 years, and they don't make very much money. Like, they don't make near enough money for what the work they do, and it's not like it's not a wage to them. It's just a stipend to do the work they do. They're incredible people, and it was the first time in 10 years they'd had any kind of an increase. And we increased the funding to extended families, so that if a child was going to go into care, if an extended family member came along, they could we would fund them. And the thing that got me with that is that made me go, we have to do this, is a grandmother came up to me, and she said, it was an Indigenous woman. She said, my daughter's not a good mom, and I'm going to take care of my grandkids, but I couldn't afford to take care of both of them, and I had to put one in care, and I kept one. And she said it was awful. And she said, but you're probably thinking that I think it was awful for the wrong reason. I said, what do you mean? She said, I wasn't upset about the one I put in care. I was upset about the one that stayed with me, because the one in care got a lot more opportunities because they could afford it that I couldn't afford. And it just gutted me. I was like, this isn't right. And so we made it so that extended families get the same amount of funding as foster families. So, and there's a lot more like aunties, uncles, grandparents taking care of kids until parents get the supports they need to take care of them on their own. Yeah. And I didn't even mention the childcare. My God, that was huge. It's made such a difference in people's life. Yeah, that was exciting.
Sometimes cabinet ministers, their backgrounds and their portfolios don't necessarily align, but in that case, was it one where
it aligned?
It aligned, and you brought your background to that job?
Definitely aligned. Yeah, it was exciting. Yeah.
You then became the first woman to serve as Forest Minister in BC.
Did, yeah.
What did you think about taking on that role?
I was surprised when Premier Horgan asked me. I said, oh, okay. I was prepared to stay on as Children and Families, and he says, no, Kat, he says, I want you to be Forest Minister, and I think you're the first one. I'm pretty sure you're the first female Forest Minister in BC. And he said, actually, I think you're the first female Forest Minister in Canada. And turned out to be true. And it was exciting. I mean, I had some background in the forest industry, working in the pulp mill, so I understood it. We live in a forest-dependent town, and I grew up in a family where my dad worked in the pulp mill all my life, so it was, I know the benefits and what needs to happen with forestry in that sense, and it was exciting. There was changes that had to be made in the forest industry. We had to look at doing forestry different, more value added, and that was tough for some people, tough for people in the industry, but other people have really done well. Like when you think what we've done with mass timber and how many, look what's happening with the Castlegar family, and 4 generations, and they're not investing offshore, they're not buying mills down in the United States, they're investing right here in BC and in our community, and they're going to have almost 500 people working for them once the new place is finished in total, and it's a really incredible story, and it just shows that you can make changes and thrive. I mean, the old growth was a big one.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because industry often says, we don't have enough access to wood, and other people say there's too much being cut. How did you come to arrive at those old growth deferrals?
You had to have a happy medium, right, Greg? I mean, we need to protect the old growth, but at the same time, we need to have a vibrant forest industry in this province, and you can do both. There can be the fiber that's needed, but we also need to protect that old growth. And the deferrals were decided with, we had expertise within the ministry, as well as expertise outside of the ministry to help, and those deferrals were made, and we also recognize that after we passed the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that we needed to work with the Indigenous nations on whose traditional territories the trees are growing. So there had to be better sharing of the resources. So working with Indigenous nations across the province, and some nations are very much into the forest industry and work, like some have sawmills, they want to work in it, they want to be part of that industry, and some want to protect more of the industry. I mean, you look at the Great Bear Rainforest, that part of that was protection of a lot of old growth and a lot of Indigenous territories up and down the coast. So it was a tough one. Probably, I mean, the toughest one was Fairy Creek, that protest, and it was hard because it got really personal. The Indigenous nations were not respected. In fact, the Pachidat, on whose traditional territory that is, they have a sawmill, and it feeds, and keeps, a good family-paying jobs for many people in their nation, and they were not respected, by the protesters. Many of the protesters weren't even from BC. We tracked the polling in that, and the polling, the social media, and less than 10% of the social media on Fairy Creek came from Canada. The majority of it came from the United States and Europe. So of people supporting the initiative, but it got personal, and then I got harassed fairly significantly, and so did my family, and that was probably one of the hardest things of the job.
In what form did that take?
Well, at one point they did a phone campaign where they were phoning our house nonstop because I had a landline, and at the time my granddaughter was living with me, and I had some people there doing some work, and they said to me, "We got to unplug your phone." Like, it was non-stop, and there was a couple of people that decided to do hunger strikes and said they were going to starve themselves until we quit cutting down old growth. And I met with them. It was during COVID. I met with them on the phone and talked to them and understood their concerns. But at the same time, a group of people just kept up that harassment, and it got worrisome. I ended up traveling with detail. There was a case of physical assault, but nothing was ever proven on that, and so I just hoped that it was just a random thing. But I had to, it's not something you expect to do as a politician, to have the Premier has detail with them all the time. Unfortunately, Dr. Bonnie Henry has to have detail with her, and I never expected to have to do that. And yeah, so that was tough.
By then you'd been an MLA for a while. I'm sure there were lots of people who were unhappy with you for one reason or another, but you'd never experienced something like that.
Never. It never. And it just made me feel when people can be passionate about issues, and they can be outspoken, but when you get to the point where you're harassing people in a way it's just not on. I mean, and I even go after a politician because we get paid to do our job and we get paid to stand up for the decisions we make, but don't go after our family. Leave family alone.
It finally went away though, or?
Yeah, I quit being force minister.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, it finally went away.
Just before we leave your time as forest minister, I was going to ask you though, those places where there were deferrals, why a deferral instead of just saying it's protected? Permanent.
Some areas is a deferral, and there's a transition. Some of it was, to give time for the nations to determine what would be the best thing for them to do with the land, to work with the companies who could have a tenure on the land. So it was a way to make sure there was a transition period. Okay. Yeah.
All right, and then what did you think when David Eby asked you to be Minister of Finance?
I was quite shocked. We were at, there's a big conference every year in Vancouver with all the First Nations, the First Nations Leadership Gathering, where all the nations across the province, we have 204 nations in our province, so they all come together and meet with cabinet ministers. It's very similar to UBCM, but it's for the Indigenous nations. So we were at that conference, and I got a note saying that the Premier wanted to meet with me the next day and come alone, which is
is that a good sign or a bad sign?
Yeah, you feel like you're getting called to the principal's office, yeah. And I thought, oh my gosh, he wants to talk about old growth. So there was a bunch of receptions that night, and some people were going out for dinner, and I just went back to my hotel room and crammed on old growth. I thought, I got to know everything I need to know and why we're doing what we're doing. And I went in the next morning, and I said, put my folder on the table, and I said, so what do you want to know? And he says, I want to know if you'll be my Minister of Finance. I think I said an inappropriate word. I'm not going to say it on TV, but I said, why? I said, why? And we had a really good talk about why he wanted me to be the Minister of Finance and why he thought that it was a good idea.
What did he tell you?
Well, things like, he says, my years of experience, my experience in different ministries, my years of experience before I became a politician, my senior, my experience in caucus. I was one of the longest sitting members in caucus at the time. There was a few of us, but still left from '05, but I was definitely the longest sitting female. He liked the juxtaposition of he's from the city and I'm from the rural BC. He said that he's a father with young children, and I said, well, and I'm an old lady with granny. I'm an old granny, I said. And he said, no, Kat. But the fact that I've had children and grandchildren and different experiences in that way. And so he said he felt like it was a good mix, and he liked my experience, and thought I get along well with my colleagues, which is important. It's tough if you don't get along well with them and you have to tell them no. So yeah, so I said, okay, let's try this.
I read that in an interview that you gave recently, that one of the things you had to do was say no to colleagues. But what sort of things were they coming to you that you had to turn them down on? Well,
anything that happens in government has to go through a process. Ministers just don't go say, okay, I'm going to do this now. You have a mandate letter, and you go by your budget. The budget and mandate letter. If you want to do something different, there's a process. You have to go to Treasury Board. You have to get approval through Treasury Board to either change how you're going to spend your money, or if you need new ways to spend your money, and then that gets final approval at Cabinet. So, in order for it to go to Cabinet, it has to go through Treasury Board, and if Treasury Board doesn't approve it, then it doesn't go any further. Sometimes things just come directly to the chair of Treasury Board, which is me as Finance Minister, and sometimes you have to say no, that we can't afford it right now. It's not the right time. We need to, or you haven't done enough due diligence on how this is going to work. You've got to send it back and ask for more information. And the Treasury Board staff, they're an incredible group of people who go through all the proposals that come to Treasury Board even before it gets to Treasury Board. They go through it, they give advice, it goes through legal services to make sure everything's above board. You just don't go out and say, I'm going to spend X number of millions of dollars on something and do it the next day. There's a process, so there's due diligence to make sure it's done properly.
Who has the final say, though? Is it you as the minister, or is it the Treasury Board, or the Cabinet, or the caucus, or who If something gets far enough into the process, where is the last stop?
It would be, the last stop would be with the chair of Treasury Board or the finance minister.
So you ultimately could have that decision.
Yeah.
How did you approach the job of finance minister?
I made sure that I learned as much as I could. Spent lots of time talking to the people that work in the ministry. We have really incredible public service in this province. They are amazing people who do their job and are totally committed to the province and to the people here. And the people in Treasury Board sometimes get a real hard shake because, they're the ones that they give a lot of, people would say, I get a lot of grief from Treasury Board, but Treasury Board's making sure that things are done properly, that things are, that they're going to last, that it's not, that this is something that's going to work. So it's making sure, I worked with them, and then, sitting down and talking to my colleagues about what's important to you in your ministry. What do you want to see happen? What do you want to see that's going to make a difference? And what new initiatives have are you looking at? And we had a lot of construction, a lot of building to do. We not only did we inherit a deficit of services, we inherited a deficit of buildings and construction and infrastructure. Like roads and hospitals, schools. We were still trying to catch up, not only with schools that needed seismic upgrading, but just schools that needed to be built. Like we were fortunate enough to get Glen Mary School, the elementary school in Trail, replaced. It had old asbestos hanging out. It had old pipes that kids could jump up and hang off of. It was just, in really bad shape. So there's a lot of places like that across the province, and you got to balance what you're operating. You got to capital what you're going to do, but it's there's some tough decisions to be made. Yeah.
But as minister, you presided over a series of deficit budgets. Mm-hmm. The last one, just over $5 billion, and there are more that are forecast over the next few years. And I'll read you a quote from Vancouver Sun columnist Vaughn Palmer from earlier this year. He said, "Conroy has the distinction of being the only finance minister in modern times to have failed to take a stab at producing a plan, however fanciful, to someday balance the budget." First of all, how would you respond to that?
Well, Vaughn knows full well, that we do 3-year budgets. We don't do 10-year budgets. We don't do 7-year budgets. He knows that. He knows the fiscal plan is for 3 years. And our fiscal plan for 3 years is declining deficits. And I also, what he didn't put in, what he probably wouldn't talk about, is it's not the right time to make cuts to people in this province. It's not the right time to raise taxes. We did raise taxes, but for the 2%. We certainly didn't raise taxes for ordinary British Columbians. And it's the right time to make sure we're providing those services that people need. And we could have cut things. We could have cut services. It would have meant cutting health care, exactly what John Restad is proposing, $4 billion he's cutting out of health care. You can't provide services and make cuts like that. People need services. We're providing more cancer care. We're providing more hospitals. We've hired thousands more new nurses in this province. We have net over 800 new family doctors who are coming from other provinces because of the work that we've been doing to make life better. It can be tough being a family doctor, and they're coming now. And people need family doctors. We're looking at different ways to do health care. There's some small rural communities that are having trouble keeping emergency docs. They're doing virtual care, and it's working. Things like that. Doing community care in communities like Trail just got their community care facility that's going to be opening up in the probably not till next spring, but it's they go ahead with it, so funding for that. So we looked at things like that. Are we going to cut schools? Are we going to cut teachers? Teachers need supports in the school for the kids. Kids nowadays have a lot more needs than they used to when I was in school, or even when I taught early childhood. There's different issues, and we need to make sure we support people. And I could have balanced the budget, but I would have been balancing it on the backs of the people of British Columbia, and I couldn't do that. So
was balancing the budget, though, something that was considered and rejected, or something that was not even?
We had I can't, what's said in cabinet is in confidence, but I can tell you that there was many discussions, about what we should and shouldn't do. And I had the full support of Cabinet and caucus. So it's, it was a tough decision. And I know it's on my head, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with Mr. Palmer calling me whatever he wants to call me. It's water off a duck's back. Because I know in my heart of hearts, we did the right thing.
Is it important, though, for government to have balanced books? I'm just wondering, what are the consequences of not doing so?
Well, it's having a deficit, but you have to know, Greg, we still have one of the strongest economies in the country. We're still the only province with a AAA credit rating. So that means when we borrow money, we pay lower interest rates. We still have one of the lowest GDP to debt ratios out of any province. We're right up there with some of the other provinces. Like we're doing okay, but there's still people in our province who are struggling. They're struggling with housing. We need to invest in housing. Like there is significant housing that's needed. We need to invest in like some of the other programs I've already talked about. And it's, we'll get back to balance. The other issue that's happened is resources are down. Natural gas has gone down almost, it's over 60%, the price of natural gas. So those revenues aren't coming in. But next year, like when all the economists are saying that, and I'm not an economist, but so I listen to the economists very astutely because it's important what they say. So our economists in government, as well as private economists, are saying that resources are going to come back next year. They're starting to see that the economy is going to come back. Interest rates are going down. The high interest rates really hurt people. And they'll continue to hurt people for a little bit longer. Thank goodness they're getting cut. Thank God they're coming down. But it's still going to hurt people for a while longer. People didn't spend as much just because of interest rates and after COVID, people kind of went like, people spent a lot during COVID, and they continued to a little bit after, but we're seeing them starting to not now just because of the interest rates and things, and just things are a bit more tough. So we have to respect that and know that people need support.
Just one more on finance then. When you're doing budget projections, is the idea to get as close to what you actually think is going to happen, or to be a little bit more conservative, or what was your philosophy on that?
I learned the word prudent. The finance staff say it's best to be prudent, and so we have been prudent. We've been, we've estimated low for resources because we want to be reasonable with what we think is going to happen. We like our wildfires, for instance. We budget about $250 million for wildfire costs, because if you budget more than that, you don't want to leave funds hanging, because once it's budgeted for that's where it goes to. That's how the budget works. So you budget low, and then you have contingencies to be able to cover the additional costs. Last year's wildfires was $1.1 billion. This year we're probably it's not as bad. This year was a better year, about it's going to probably be about $860 million. But we've also brought in the BC Wildfire Service full-time, so that they've gone from working part-time just when there's the fire season to now working full-time. So not only are they fighting the fires during the fire season, they're doing the wildfire mitigation in communities that need it, helping Fire Smart, Fire Safe to go out and work with people, and it's making a difference working with community forests to make sure we can do prescribed burning in the off seasons. I mean, we gave grants to the Columbia Basin Trust, and then they went and circulated that money out amongst community forests in our region, and both in the Kootenays, and there was wildfire prescribed burning done in a number of communities, and there was some done up the Slocan Valley, which did help that fire. As terrible as it was, it could have been worse. Yeah.
Let's move on to one of your other portfolios. You were also the minister responsible for the Columbia River Treaty negotiations. So what do you think about the tentative deal that's been reached?
Pretty happy about it, the agreement in principle. It's an agreement that that's what the final treaty is going to be based on. It's going to be, it shows that people of this basin will have more control over the water levels, more control over what we do with it, more control over our ecosystems, the environment. There's a whole issue of trying to bring fish back. We're working with Indigenous nations. That's never been done before. The nations are working with the governments, both federal and provincial, and their own to, how can we do this to bring back the salmon? There's already been some experiments with it, and it's, they're feeling pretty confident about it. I mean, getting around some of the dams is a bit of a concern, but people are feeling confident about it. So that's a great one. But the fact that we'll get a little bit less in the Canadian entitlement, but that was always in the treaty that it would start to go down after a number of years. But we think we've negotiated a pretty good deal, and that we're going to get funding for flood risk management to make sure that we still continue to control the water levels so that they're not flooding down in the States. But also there will be some money coming to pay for things that they get that they want and need. But we will have more control over our destiny. It won't happen for a while. I have to keep reminding people of that because unfortunately the water levels are a little low, not as bad as last year, but they're still low. But it'll be better for communities like Nakusp and all along the Arrow Lakes. It's going to make a significant difference, as well as over in the East Kootenays.
So if this was a labor negotiation, you'd be recommending ratification of this?
Definitely. Okay. And to that end, it's like we've approved it. The Canadian government has also, and now it just needs to go to the Senate, and it'll probably do that. And it probably will do that before January. And the representatives in the U.S. are supportive of as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
The one thing, though, the public, of course, was excluded from the negotiations, so although there were sort of updates that kind of periodically, sort of told you what was going on, but they weren't terribly detailed. So now that there is a tentative agreement, is there anything else you can tell us about the negotiations?
Well, I wasn't actually at the negotiations either. So as minister responsible, they came to me and told me what was going on, but for me, it was really important, and for many people, not to have politicians at the table. We had experts at the table, and that was really important. And the things that I talked about, like about the riparian zones, the ecosystems, the more control of water, and that's all things that are in the AIP. There's actually a great video on. You can go on the website, the Columbia River Treaty website, and there's a video with all the different people that were actually at the table talking about how what the AIP looks like in detail. So it's a really good thing to go and watch if you want to get more information out of it. But you just know that it's gonna be good for the area. Yeah.
Which was your favorite cabinet portfolio, and which was your least favorite?
I've been asked that, and it's really hard to say because there was favorite things in all three, or four, including all things. We called it All Things Columbia because it was the Columbia Basin Trust and Power Corp as well. There was great things that happened in all three, and there was tough things that happened in all three. It was just an honor to be minister of all of them.
Proudest moment or proudest accomplishment in office?
Oh. That's hard because there were so many of them that I just feel so that we, like I was talking about earlier about some of the things we did in each of the ministries we did some pretty amazing things. The long-term effects of the childcare program. I've had people that talk to me about how they're thousands of dollars back into their pockets every month. When does government do something that puts, one young woman said to me, she's saving $2,000, she has 2 kids, she's saving $2,000 a month. She just started talking about all the things she was going to do with it. So that's made life-changing, you're making decisions that is life-changing for people, and the fact that we could do that it's pretty incredible. And I was sitting there bemoaning all the things that, I didn't do this, I wish we'd done this, and someone said, well, what did you do? Look at what you did do. And oh God, yeah. So been doing a lot of that.
Well, you anticipated the next question, which is biggest regret or missed opportunity.
I would have liked to have seen the treaty signed, but that's, I'm really happy that we did get to the IP. Would have liked to have been there for the signing of the treaty as the minister, but that's not going to happen because that'll take at least another probably 18 months before we actually get a signed treaty because of all the things that you have to go through with lots of different things. But yeah, so that I would have liked to have seen that. Gosh. I mean, there's lots of things that you'd think that would have been great to be able to do, but there's only so much money. Yeah, learned that the hard way when I came to finance, but I'm feeling pretty good about, I think I was there long enough that I got things done that I really thought were important, and yeah.
What was the best part of being in MLA for the West Kootenay, or Kootenay West?
The people. Yeah. You really get to meet people. Yeah.
Most challenging part? You've probably alluded to it already.
People, no, I'm joking. No, the travel. The travel gets to you. It's like, it's at first it's kind of, it's pretty exciting and glamorous, but it's been 20 years and then supporting Ed for 10 years. It does, kind of gets to you a little bit. Yeah.
Why did you decide not to seek re-election this time?
It's time. I think my youngest son put it into perspective the best. He said, because I said, I'm thinking of not running. And he said, Mom, I was 2 when Dad first got elected to the school board, and I'm 40. So there's been a Conroy on the ballot for 38 years.
I was just about to say, there was no other Conroy who wanted to continue that legacy?
No, they all were pretty clear on that. Yeah, they said, no thanks, Mom, no.
How involved were you, though, in finding your successor as a candidate, Steve Morissette?
Well, Steve came forward and said he was interested, and of course there's a process that the party goes through, and he ended up being the candidate for the area, and I was super happy to support him. He's great. He's got lots of experience, and he's known throughout the region, not only as the mayor of Fruitvale, but he was on the regional district of Kootenay Boundary. He worked for the school district in Castlegar. So people here know him, and he's just a really good person and has a lot of the, he's got a lot of the same philosophies as I do, as far as, lots of good family support. They're very supportive of him. I think the work he did in Fruitvale, bringing in childcare, bringing in housing, just all those things that are near and dear to New Democrat's heart. So
will you be working on his campaign, or you will be?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I can work on campaigns and help out. I'm also going to be what we call the minister left behind. So as of midnight today, Friday the 20th, I no longer will be the MLA, but I'll be the finance minister until there's a new finance minister. Yeah.
What advice would you have for whomever takes over as MLA, be it Steve or another candidate? What's the biggest thing that you would tell them?
Well, the biggest thing is always to be there for your constituents, and make sure you have good constituency staff, because I've had really amazing staff and since 2005, and they're one of the reasons you get re-elected, because they do amazing work with the constituents. But always phoning people back, that's a good one to never forget to do that, and just be out there in your community and involve your family.
What are your retirement plans?
Well, I'm going to do some traveling, going to do some work on the farm. Our purebred cattle are coming back home. Going to spend lots more time with the kids and grandkids. One granddaughter said, so when we're sick, can we come to your house now? So one asked me if I could bake Christmas cookies. I thought, I'm a lousy granny. I've never baked Christmas cookies with her because I've never really been home very much at Christmas. So little things like that will be big things for us. And I do have some travel plans. Yeah.
Any other parting comments?
Just that it's been a real honor to be the MLA for Kootenay West and Kootenay Boundary. But and I get choked up saying it.
Katrine Conroy, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thanks, Greg. Much appreciated.
I'm Greg Nesteroff, and thanks for watching. And don't forget to vote on October 19th.